the folks at Digital Dallas to put this on. This has been a really good first day, and we look forward to the second day. I want to thank Paul Bettner. He's the founder of Words for Friends. I'm sure you all have heard of that small game. There's like 80 million downloads, or probably double that now.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive. For those of you all that have never heard of Startup Grind, which I had never heard of it before this summer, it is an organization out of California that gets accomplished entrepreneurs together and to educate, to inspire, and to connect entrepreneurs that want to learn about how to grow their business and how to scale. And I was reading an article on TechCrunch, and they were talking about some article I was interested in, and I noticed that the author of the article was a guy named Derek Anderson, and I had never heard his name, and I clicked on it, and he said that he was the head of Startup Grind. And I said, it's kind of interesting. I looked at their mission, and at the end of the day, there was a chapter in Austin, but there was not one in Dallas. So I said, F that. Dallas needs one. Kind of like sick of that. And so I called him up, and so here we are. Every month we get together. Our next event is January 14th. We're going to have Brad Hunstable. He's the CEO of Ustream. Ustream has about 50 million uniques a month, and it's the largest online live streaming video. And what we want to do is bring in Paul and just kind of have a conversation about growing his business and everything else. And so as I get started, I don't talk about where'd you grow up and what's your sign. I mean, people can read that, right? Entrepreneurship is very, very hard. And you've got to have a lot of passion. And so what really motivates you and what gets you a speeding ticket when you wake up in the morning and you want to go to work, say, hey, this is really good. Even though it's going to be a hard day or a great day, you don't care because you're doing what you love.
Number one thing that motivates me, and I'm sure a lot of you all, is building things that I want to use. So, you know, it's easy to kind of get distracted by this thought of, well, are other people going to like what I'm creating? Are other people going to like me? Or, you know, it's easy to get into that mindset. But, you know, fundamentally, the thing that gets me up in the morning is, and how I know I'm on the right track, or how I feel that way, is when I know that at the end of the day, I'm building something because I want to use it, and that I want my life, like I want that thing in my life. In the case of Words with Friends, same thing. You know, I was kind of frustrated that that kind of thing didn't exist. I had been playing with my friends chess on our desktops, and kind of would stop by and take turns and this kind of thing. And I was like, this is dumb. You know, I mean, what is technology for if not to solve this problem? And right. And I built it because I wanted to play that game with my friends. And you know, it was really just focused on delivering an experience that made that easy for me to do. And you know, I think that's the best driver of.
So was it chess for friends versus Word for Friends, or was it always you want to do the chess first, and that's what you went with?
I thought chess was going to be easier, but it turned out to be a lot harder. There's all sorts of rules in chess that I didn't even really recognize until I had to work on them. Do you know what en passant is, for instance? I had no idea what that was. Anyway. And Chess with Friends is really just supposed to be a proof of concept for us. You know, for what we really believed in was this idea of building kind of the digital board gaming for this generation.
Right.
You know, like I had this vision in our head of the fun that we have when we sit together around a board game and we're playing. And you know, I ask people like, well, when you play a board game with your friends or your family, and if you did that last week and I asked you like, what do you remember about that game that you played? I don't think you'd tell me like, oh, I remember that time when I got Park Place and you had, you know, Boardwalk and I landed on this and then I got your mortgage and whatever. You would tell me like, oh, I remember when you told that really nasty joke about your mom and then this other thing and like, so, you know, when I thought about that, I thought really the game isn't the point. The point is to create this platform for people to connect and socialize and have an excuse to talk. And, you know, that's really what's ended up happening. I hear that with Words with Friends all the time. People are saying, you know, when they come up and they tell me what they love about the game, they explain experiences like, oh, I love that I'm talking to my brother-in-law across the country that I've never talked to before. They're never like, oh, I love that time I made this triple word and then the triple letter and like, you know, it's
the relationship.
Yeah, it's an excuse to socialize.
Right.
And I think that's really what we set out to create, and that's what we were able to do.
Well, you know, Zynga talks about connecting the world through games, right? And if I understand it correctly, you all had half of their total traffic just on mobile when they bought you guys.
No, it was way more than that.
Okay. So when you were coding and you and your brother were, you know, kind of in the jigs and you were doing it, were you dreaming of Super Bowl ads and Saturday Night Live and all that? Kind of where would you think this was going to go, and where did you?
I think if you're, you know, I mean, it's impossible to be an entrepreneur and to start a business and to not dream of the success that you see other entrepreneurs have and be like, what if that happened? You know, and I think even if we might not admit it to ourselves, secretly that's a little bit of what drives us anyway. But,
right.
I think if you're focused on that, that's not, you know, I think, like I was saying before, I would not have at all expected ridiculous things like a Super Bowl ad or like Alec Baldwin getting thrown off a plane. And in fact, you can't target those things. Those are fortuitous. And I, you know, I was talking to somebody the other day about this, and they're like, well, how do you get something like that to happen? And I'm like, what kind of question is that? You can't. Yeah. But if you build something that, in our case, we're trying to build, you know, I come from this background of creating games like Halo and, you know, these traditional console games, very popular, but what we really set out to do with the With Friends games and with what we were doing on mobile was create games for everyone. You know, so I had this picture in my mind that I'd be able to create a game that my wife would want to play, and she would. And if you asked her today, "Are you a gamer?" she would say, "No, I'm not a gamer. Not a gamer at all." "Oh, really? Well, how many times did you launch Words with Friends today?" "I can go look it up." "Oh, 10 times, and you spend an hour playing, and you still don't call yourself a gamer." And I think that actually means that we succeeded at that because.
Right. They didn't know what they were doing, but they were doing what you intended them to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, if I go back
but to answer your question, no, I'd never envisioned that.
Exactly.
That's not.
So, you know, culture's a really big deal. And you guys came out of Ensemble, and so did Bonfire, right?
Yep.
And, you know, you've been involved with Age of Empires, you've been involved with Halo. You know, you kind of have a unique ability to see things that, you know, people will attract to. You know, what do you look for in games, or what do you look for in something? Is it that connection, or is it, you know, the game mechanics, or kind of what's some of the insights that if you were building a game today that you would be really focused on nailing it so that you get that user experience right?
So there are a couple things. You know, what I focused on mobile and have been focused on is a little bit different than what I focused on when I was working on console games. Okay. You know, for me as a game developer, a primary driver has been I want to see a smile on somebody's face. So, you know, ultimately, when we're creating something and we're prototyping it and I sit somebody down, that's what I'm looking for, is I'm looking for them to not have those moments of frustration that often, and instead to have moments of joy and happiness where they envision that they're going to, in a game, they envision they're going to do something like, oh, what if I win and I knock that thing over? What would happen? And I think when a game fails is when they go to do that thing and nothing happens. They run into an invisible wall, they, you know, whatever. And when they're overjoyed is when they do it and that causes a chain reaction and this thing jumps out and, you know, whatever, and the world is sort of reacting to what they're doing. The way that we tried to translate that into mobile was, and I think Apple has really done a good job of this and sort of set the example. When I hand an iPhone to my 4-year-old, I don't have to tell her what to do because the first thing she tries works. Because it's what she'd expect to happen. So she sees a little bar on the screen that's flashing like slide this, and it looks like a switch maybe that she's seen in her life, and so she tries it and it works. And you know, it's that principle of intuitiveness that you know, especially as we've moved to mobile games and touch-based games, that's really driving what I'm doing now. And then so that's one whole section. The other whole section is social. I mean, for me, I've always been attracted to applications and games in particular that are social in nature. I mean, right. From the very first time that we all had, you know, internet connections that were modems and, you know, with 14.4, you know, baud and all this kind of, yeah, exactly. And the first time I saw a computer talk to another computer across the room, I just thought that was the neatest thing ever, and I've always been fascinated, yeah.
What about the difference between building for consoles and building for mobile? Because obviously you hung your hat on mobile, and nobody would argue that's not where the world's going. But there are differences in both how games are designed and how you interact with them and how often and things like that. If you were designing a game today, would you get involved in consoles, or would you just stick to mobile and that's it?
Well, I tend to be, personally, I'm kind of a contrarian, so the fact that everybody's now running to mobile is making me go like, yeah, what's next, or where maybe I'll go back to console, or, you know, right. But I think that, you know, moving from the console space to the mobile space, the biggest change has been the broadening of the audience. You know, when you know, I have friends that still look at a controller, an Xbox controller sitting on a table, and like, I'm not going to touch that. It's got 20,000 buttons on it, and I don't even know. I'm just going to leave that there. And you know, I think Nintendo has gone a lot ways to addressing that with the Wii, where you just pick it up and you swing it. It's a tennis racket. That's great. Mobile is, you know, taking that even further, and I think it's still just the beginning of that.
Right. What about sound? How important is sound in a game? Because I grew up playing Asteroids and Pac-Man and all that, and those sounds I still hear them.
Let's see. How many people in the audience have played Words with Friends? Could you raise your hand? Okay, leave your hand up if you actually listen to the sound and leave it on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So not very important.
So it's not important on mobile? Right?
So I personally think it's important, and thank you for the one person that left his hand up that actually plays our game with the sound on. Thank you. 2 people. My cousin is actually the person that we hired as a sound designer back at New Toy, and I think he's brilliant at what he does, and he made all those little sound effects and Words with Friends with his mouth and all sorts of, you know, silly things. I think that it adds a lot to the experience for the people that care about it, but I actually believe that fundamentally it's not an important thing in a mobile game. I mean, people, yeah, you just have to think about the venue in which people are consuming the game. They don't want to leave their sound on because their boss is going to see that they're playing a game. So, you know, and actually, I mean, along those lines, even things like having our games be portrait orientation rather than landscape, because when you turn your phone like this, you're obviously playing a game, and we didn't want to do that. So, you know, having all our games be something you can hold and look like you're browsing your email and not know the difference, you know, that's been important for us.
So being able to slip under the radar screen important in mobile?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I just, because people want to consume their, whatever it is, whether it's entertainment or an application or whatever, at any moment. So anything, even turning your phone can be a barrier to that.
So to the moment, do you design the games for quick iterations for a couple minutes at a time, or kind of how do you think about the user experience in terms of how long they're going to engage in that particular session?
I think about it as stoplight entertainment, which is probably a really bad thing because I don't actually want people playing our games while they're driving. But that's kind of been our mantra.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, you know, but if you can make your move, if you can play a turn, if you can, you know, do it at a stoplight, then you're going to fit it into your life. And I think that has really informed all parts of the design that we've put into our games. I mean, it wasn't as intuitive in the beginning to us. It was more like we were building it that way because I was annoyed if an app took too long to start.
Right.
But, you know, looking back on it, I realized that I believe that was, you know, one of the ingredients to the success of the With Friends franchise versus, for instance, Scrabble, which came out a month before Words with Friends released, had this massive brand recognition, and just got clobbered by Words with Friends. And I mean, it's just not even, like, it's an order of magnitude off. And Scrabble, to get to the place where you could play with another person, you had to dig through a couple different menus. Yeah. They had all these animations and sound and stuff that they were loading so it took maybe 40 seconds to load Scrabble and maybe 10 seconds to load Words with Friends, and that makes all the difference.
The light's already changed in the 30 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't want to play anymore, so you put it away and you never launch it again.
Now, are those principles that you learned at Ensemble, or those principles that you just knew inherently in yourself, or talking among friends, or how'd you learn some of those techniques?
I think it just comes down to that motivation to build something that you yourself are going to want to use. Right. And, you know, if you're being honest about it, and I think that's where the difficulty is having that self-honesty and sitting down and saying, you know, the difference between, I think this is going to be, somebody else is going to think this is really neat, but if you really like, but am I actually going to use this, or is it kind of annoying me? Do I see myself playing this game or using this app, you know, a couple weeks from now?
Right.
And I think that makes all the difference. And really, you know, fundamentally, that's the difference between Words with Friends and a lot of other apps or games is that engagement and that retention with the users. It's just it's a completely different world. You know, people ask me about ways to monetize, and maybe that could be one of your questions. Like but the way that Words with Friends has been successful through advertisement and through it's entirely because of the way it engages users. Most apps are used for, you know, the way we talk about it is, there's these really critical milestones in the engagement curve of a user or the player. Is somebody still playing have the app open 5 minutes later? That's a really important milestone. The second really critical milestone is after they close that app for the first time, do they ever launch it again? And most apps, that's a huge fall off. You go from, like, you know, you lose 50% of your users there. And then on day 2, do they ever launch your app again? And then 1 week later, and like hitting those milestones was really important to us as we were building the app.
Did you all build your own internal tools, or did you use Flurry? Or
we used Flurry in the beginning. And now Zynga, of course, has a ton of internal.
All their internal terms.
Yeah,
right.
but they're not far off from what Flurry offers.
So Flurry did enough. If you're starting a new company and you're capital constrained, Flurry be good enough?
Yeah, I work with, or I'm friends with a company called Burstly, or which you guys may know as Test Flight. They have a couple different parts for app development.
Test Flight's it's hard.
Yes, it's hard. Well, anyway, they have a new product launching that's pretty awesome called Flight Path, and what I've tried to ask them to focus on, because I think this is where it becomes really difficult, is Flurry will present a ton of information to you, but knowing what to look for is what's really difficult. And I actually don't, I mean, once you understand it, once you've seen the way that a certain profile of an app looks versus another one,
right.
then you're like, oh, mine is way far off.
Yeah,
but most people don't ever get to see that. So, and I wish, Flurry has started to introduce that stuff now. If you guys, for those who use Flurry who've seen it, like they'll show you your app compared to other apps, your retention is this, or your engagement is this, or whatever, which is really helpful. But that's I think, where there's a lot of opportunity for those tools to be better.
Did you ever look at Google Analytics on the mobile versus Flurry and kind of have different deals, or you just went straight Flurry?
We went straight Flurry because Google Analytics didn't really offer
at the time
what we needed, so we kind of, we got on Flurry.
That's interesting. So going back to your Ensemble days, in the gaming world, it's all about studios, right? And talk about studios within gaming as opposed to, other ways that software companies kind of build software. Talk about the culture of studios and what you like about it. I mean, obviously, it's a lot around creativity. Is it around analytics? Like Zynga's huge on analytics. It's more analytical driven than really creative driven. But you got studios, which I assume are more creative driven.
I actually think that the big thing that's happening in game development now, to your point, is a transition from the studio model to really, I don't know the word for it, but a full business model. So
the hits model, like what Rovio's
well,
doing
that's a different, yes, that too, but that's a different thing. What I mean is, like, when I was working in Ensemble, we didn't have like an HR department. We didn't have our own advertising people. We didn't think about that stuff. It was always immediately you'd say, we're going to create a game, we get the product, so all we need is developers, and the publisher is going to do everything else. Mm-hmm. And in the mobile space, publishers can still be valuable in some ways, but generally, the real opportunity is to build an entire business. And in the game industry, that's a foreign concept, because that studio model is more like, just the creatives and then the publishers handling all the business side. And so as we were growing the business parts of New Toy, it was entirely new to us. I mean, just even understanding some of the basic terms of how to run a business, it's just not something we had done before. But I think it was way more effective. I mean, it connected us with things like marketing in ways that we had never been exposed to before.
I saw some interesting interviews with guys that started PayPal, and they didn't even know what a chargeback was.
Yeah.
And they were getting into that game, right?
I'm trying to remember. There was some word that when we joined Zynga, and there was just a number of those cases where I would hear some term, and now I know that, like, if you don't know that and you're running a business,
you're in trouble.
Yeah, you're in trouble. But we didn't know it at all, I mean, we learned it as we went.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh.
What, in terms of kind of your next steps, what do you find for inspiration? You've got several wins under your belt, not just one, but several, and you've got this body of expertise. How do you find to harvest that expertise and kind of challenge into something that can challenge you again?
So I am most drawn towards the undiscovered countries. So when we were first developing on the iPhone, it was maybe just a month after the App Store had launched, and all my friends who are doing console game development, they're looking at me like I'm totally nuts, because the latest Call of Duty or latest Halo is making $1 gajillion. You're going to go on this App Store thing and sell a game for 99 cents, and good luck with that. And now everybody wants to create an app, and it's much more of the the red bloody waters, and all the sharks are there, and there's been a lot of consolidation. That tends to, personally for me, drive me away from something. What's inspiring to me now is, and this has actually always been inspiring to me, I think that in some ways, what a company like Apple does, it's amazing and it's incredibly difficult. But in some ways, it actually looks kind of easy, because all they have to do is turn on the TV and say, "Oh, look, let's watch Iron Man. Let's pull it up on the big screen. Oh, look, Jarvis. There's what we got to build. Done." And then 20 years ago, it was turn on Star Trek: Next Generation, and everybody's holding an iPad. Go look at one of those shows. Everybody's holding an iPad. Nobody even knew what an iPad was, and it was right there on the screen. Now, building something like that is incredibly difficult and something only Apple can do. But having the imagination of thinking about what's going to come next, you don't have to have the imagination. Just go watch Iron Man. You know, and I think that for me, that's what's most inspiring. I can see those things, and I see where human and computer interaction is going from here. I can kind of picture, as I'm sure you guys can, what's coming next after the iPhone, and this whole touchscreen thing that's captured all of our attention right now. And for me, what's coming next is most exciting.
I want to talk about what's coming next, but I want to go back to Apple. Do you subscribe to Steve Jobs' theory that I think too many entrepreneurs look at, which is, screw the customer, I know what the customer wants, I'm going to go build that? Or do you look at customer feedback and say, we might want to listen to what they're looking for? Because they're successful companies and failures in both those models.
I think, yes, and then actually I think you can subscribe to either and be very successful. Yeah. What I think is where people get off and is they say they want to subscribe to one of the theories because they think that's the thing they should be saying is when they get up in front of as a leader of their company or in the press or whatever, but actually their tendency is to do the other thing. That's when I think it gets difficult. But having been on both ends of the spectrum, with New Toy, we did no user feedback, customer research, anything like. Even I knew what those things were, having worked on the Halo games, you know. But it's not in my nature to do those things. I felt like if I focus on building it for myself and what I believe, what I want to exist, then that's okay. And then at Zynga, we did the complete opposite of that. So Zynga really won't develop a product unless all of the consumer research proves that thing that they should go make is an incremental, you know, is a market that they should go after. Like I said, I think either can be very successful. In both those two examples, Apple and Zynga are, you know, great examples of, at least in a certain time frame, very successful. But
what you're saying is you have to be pure. You have to be pure about how you're going to go about that, so you're not diluting one side or the other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that purity of you know, purpose is where the best stuff happens.
So Rovio, Angry Birds, and Star Wars. Is that selling out? Crass capitalism, or is that really smart?
No, I think that I think it's really smart. I think that Angry Birds. So the history of that company, Rovio, is fascinating. That company is not. They're not really game developers. They developed a ton of games.
I think 56.
50 some odd games. Yeah. So they didn't have this track record of developing hits, but what they had is, if you go look at the family that founded that company, they have this rich marketing history and pedigree that goes back many generations in their family. So as soon as they got the hit they needed, which was a little bit of a roll of the dice, that was it. Then they hit that marketing that they knew how to do, and you know, and they stayed true to that as being the thing that they were really good at.
Right.
And that, you know, generated this massive success for them that they can now roll into other products, and you know.
Yeah, they can leverage. So in terms of industry publications, anything that you read that you find that's really insightful, that, you know, it might be a blog, might be a magazine, but one of the things that I've always found to be interesting is you can learn a lot from people by what they read and what's kind of on their list. And so what are the top, say, 15 things that you read on a weekly, monthly, daily basis?
I probably, like a lot of you, I spend too much time in my Google Reader, and having to get that down to 0 every night, you know, is like kind of a chore.
Right.
And, you know, it's funny because I used to... I don't know. I've got, I mean, everything. Everything that's in the game industry, from Kotaku to Joystick to Engadget to TechCrunch to Verge to, you know, all the big stuff.
Yeah, all the big stuff, right.
A couple things that are like hobbies and, you know, photography and stuff like that, but mostly all the tech blogs. And I wish one of you guys would invent a tool that would intelligently know that one of those sites has posted the same story as another site and only show me the one that I care about instead of having to go through 400 things every night. But anyhow, in terms of like other publications, there's not actually a lot of good game writing in the U.S. A lot of it's coming out of the UK. So there's a really good UK magazine called Edge that I love, that does really great writing and articles. There's some online things, but you know, the other thing is just Game Developer Magazine, Develop Magazine, those kind of publications. I don't know how many of you guys are aware of how much of a hotbed Dallas actually is for game development. You were mentioning Austin, of course Austin as well.
Bonfire here.
Yeah, but I mean, you've got some of the most, id Software. You've got some of the largest, most successful game companies operating here in Dallas, and I think there's got to be, I know there's a couple dozen different studios, and you know, the Gearbox guys that did, oh my gosh, what's the name of their recent game? Borderlands, thank you. Is that, no, okay. Yeah, those guys are right down the street, and I think they're one of the largest studios here in Dallas now.
What could the studios or the people that want to promote the studios in Dallas do to help facilitate their mission of, getting the word out and kind of getting more traction? Because, if you look at the blogs that are out in Silicon Valley, you got TechCrunch, you got VentureBeat, you got OM, GigOM, you got everything, and we don't have all that here.
No, we still need to make, and this is on all of us, we need to make Dallas seem cooler to people. Like, right. I don't know how, for me in the game industry, it's still a grind to try and get people to come here to Dallas, especially if they want to go to Silicon Valley or they want to, even go to Florida or wherever else. Right. And generally it's Austin. Like, why don't you have a studio in Austin? Why can't we be in Austin? Dallas just doesn't seem cool to people. And
what were you saying?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I think Dallas is great. It has a lot of potential and a ton of people here. And but it's still difficult to convince people that it's a cool place. So.
What's interesting is, especially in the enterprise world, the venture money goes to Austin, but all their customers are here in Dallas.
Yeah, I know. Like it's a hugely successful area with tons of customers and tons of businesses and whatever. But people just don't associate cool with Dallas yet.
Yeah. So
we're working on it.
Picking up on your team, right? A very smart entrepreneur once told me that the first 10 people you hire will determine kind of the vector of your culture. Do you subscribe to that?
Oh yeah, it's the first 5 or 3 people.
Yeah,
even.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So what do you look for in those 3 people? If you were starting a company today, first time, but leveraging the knowledge you have, the mistakes you made, the positive things you've had, how would you kind of assemble that team? What would be your thought process?
I'm looking across the audience to see if there's potential age bias here. I have a tendency now to look for, and as frustrating as this is, because I was one of the people that got passed over for reasons like this when I was younger, but I tend to look for older, more experienced folks that are done searching for their own identity and not trying to get that in their career anymore, so right. Because they got their family and they're all fine there, so that they can really focus on their work. Because hiring folks that are straight out of college or what have you, there can tend to be a lot more instability there. And so with the most senior people that are going to define the culture, it's great if those people can really have this kind of stable home life and stable identity, right. And be able to just really pour everything else into work.
And when you're interviewing people for the first time, you've never met them, what are you trying to get at? What are you looking for?
I don't know. It's a combination of just kind of character judgment, the kind of thing that you can only sense when you sit down with somebody and you one-on-one.
Nonverbal communication.
Yeah.
Like that? Right.
And that kind of confidence and stuff that comes across there.
Right.
But I'm also looking for just a sense of drive, the fact that just asking them to explain for 5 minutes what things have they done up till now.
Right.
And, the most fascinating people are the ones that sort of, even though they had some job that might have been a little boring, they went and did something else on the side, or they went and did this project, or what have you.
Goes back to their passion.
Yeah, and somebody where you can mention an article that you read last week about a particular thing, and oh yeah, I read the same thing, and they're right there, right. Engaged with the industry and with what's happening.
What they know. Right.
Yeah. Those people stand out. I mean, you can always sense them coming.
They do make a difference.
Yeah, and speaking of culture, I just. What you said and that quote from that other entrepreneur, I think it is absolutely critical. The initial culture of a company, I've seen so many and been part of a few companies that have tried desperately to turn from where they had started, where their founder, where their CEO had set the company, the path that they were on, and right. The culture there. And it's like, it's usually not possible, because the effect that those founders and those couple of people in the beginning have on the culture and how that multiplies. This is a little bit tangential, but what I'm always trying to create with the companies and the studios that I've been blessed to fund, and hopefully what's coming next, is not as much a culture as a cult. Have you guys eaten at what's the place called? Raising Cane's?
Yeah.
The chicken finger place? Okay.
My kids love it.
Yeah, awesome place. Fantastic food. If you've ever sat there, and this is fascinating to me, I've sat in Raising Cane's, and you can go to any Raising Cane's, there's I think a half dozen of them here in Dallas now, and notice how happy the people are that are working there. They're just damn happy to fire it up to make chicken fingers for you. So I sat down, I got my chicken fingers, I'm sitting in one of the restaurants, and this girl is cleaning the table next to me, and she's whistling, and so I'm like, come here. Like, what the hell are you so happy about? Like, you're cleaning, I mean, it's fine, it's great, I'm not, but, and she spent the next 20 minutes talking to me about Raising Cane's, about the dog whose name is Kane, and where the name of the company comes from, and the founder who she had never met, but she could tell me his life story, and like, this thing, and she just went on and on and on, and I realized that what that company has been able to do, and what I think some of the greatest companies are able to do, is establish a cult of their own culture. Because especially if you're going to expand, I mean, if you're 5 guys or 5 people in an office, it's easier to maintain that. But if you start to grow, and even if you get to 100 people, 200 people,
it's one of your biggest challenges to scale the business.
Yeah, exactly. You want somebody who's working at a remote Raising Cane's franchise to be able to just spout out the values of your company without ever having met you, and I think that's what that's what I'm most focused on, because I think if you get that right, it propagates. You don't, I mean, it's like it's a virus.
Big wind at your sail.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that founder was Rod Canyon, who founded Compaq, so he knew a little bit about what he was doing.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of going back to what you think about, what are you willing to share about kind of what you see? And we don't need secrets, but we want secrets.
No, it's easy. I'm building Jarvis, so from Iron Man. No, I
hint, hint, hint.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like I said, I'm really fascinated by what comes next. I think there's still tons of Words with Friends like opportunities on the App Store, and the iPhone. I love like apps like Uber. You guys have used it. They're here in Dallas now.
Yeah, they are.
They are in Dallas. Yeah, okay. I just
take a little longer than when you're in Soma to get a car.
We're kind of a little more spread out.
They're here.
Yes.
They're here. Lyft isn't here, and Scooter's not here, but Uber's here.
Yeah, so in San Francisco, it's like the only way to get around because the taxi service is so bad. But anyway, that I just think is a fascinating example of technology disrupting another business. And it's happened a million times now with the iPhone, and I still think there are a million more. Like things that just haven't even occurred to us yet of like, oh, I'm doing this thing that if I coupled it with a unique app or a unique way of doing it, it would completely disrupt that existing business. Mm-hmm. Those things are very fascinating to me. But I think I'll never not be a game developer.
Yeah.
I like I said, I fundamentally love to see the smile on people's faces when they play the games, when they connect with others in the games, when they, enjoy that. And I think, fundamentally, I guess I'm an entertainer. So,
as we say in Texas, you got to bloom where you're planted.
Yeah.
Right? Exactly. So, kind of going back to trends, right? We were talking earlier this week about the iPad, and we're talking about the iPad and the convergence of that versus these mini projectors. And so, you got Obi-Wan Kenobi, like in Star Wars, you get a little 3D. Do you see that as right around the corner? Do you see that longer term? Or?
I think it's closer than we imagine, because it's not just, it's obvious to all of us, we can look at technology and we can see the rate at which technology is advancing is accelerating. And in fact, the rate it's accelerating is accelerating. That's fine. But I think what we fail to sometimes think about and grasp is that actually our ability, like not ours, but I mean consumers' ability to grasp the technology and bring it into their life and make it a fundamental part of their life, where they're like, oh yeah, I can't imagine how I ever lived without Facebook or Words with Friends or whatever.
Right.
That has gotten much faster. So you can introduce a product and 3 months later it can be at the saturation point where tens of millions of people are using it. And so that's what I would say is going to cause things to happen faster than we would expect.
Right.
Because we can all imagine that somebody would invent that projector or whatever that thing is. But what I think is hard for us to picture is how quickly somebody would be like, oh great, now I want one of those, and I'll go buy it for a couple $100 bucks. Now it's just part of my now it's just part of my life.
Right.
And so I think we're all going to be in the Matrix in 10 years or 5 years or whatever.
You mentioned Facebook. Everybody has a brand image of Facebook, whether it's good or bad, as an app developer and their orientation to those app developers. If you are building an app on Facebook today and you took your experience that you have in an environment that was highly dependent upon Facebook, not necessarily yours, but the organization you had, what are some of the nuggets of wisdom that you would share in terms of how to navigate both that positive side and the negative side?
So I was blessed with the opportunity to work with Zuckerberg for a couple weeks on the Words with Friends Facebook product, and we went out there and sat at Facebook, and I watched how he works. I mean, he's just a developer like everybody else. You couldn't pick him out unless you were specific. But he's just sitting at a desk, coding away like all the rest of the people around him, and he came by one time we were coding the app, and he's like eating a bowl of Cheerios, and he's like, hey, what are you guys doing? you know, and like we struck up a conversation. But after working with him for a while, I realized that he's my favorite kind of entrepreneur because he has that purity of purpose.
Yeah.
So the thing to realize about, from my standpoint, working with Facebook or working with Apple, those are really the two companies that I know that are very much like this, is you have to understand that purity of purpose that they have. So Facebook's purity of purpose is social. And Zuckerberg is 100% laser focused on that. Like, all of his decisions are fundamentally going to come down to, is this advancing the state of social with my audience, with my customers? So if you're creating a product that does that, he'll give you whatever you want. He'll give you all the promotion. He'll make his platform work for you.
Right.
But the second that you start deviating from that and you start actually making it about your profits or making it about your, you know, some other goal that's not directly trying to advance social, then you're going to start rubbing against that. You're going to start hitting that friction. That's what Zynga went through. You know, initially, they were sort of aligned with the concept of increasing social because they were bringing millions of new players into games like Farmville.
Right.
But eventually they started rubbing against that because what they were doing was actually impeding the social. You're getting all the spam on your wall and all those things that are making you less likely to use Facebook, less likely to connect with your friends. And, you know, that was kind of not, that caused a lot of friction. With Apple, you know, I believe their purity of focus is kind of like you're saying, is entirely the customer. And having worked with a bunch of people there, and again, I haven't worked with Steve, I didn't get a chance to work with Steve Jobs directly, but worked with a lot of the people that are, you know, running the teams there. And has been able to create that cult of Apple where they fundamentally will not do something that is not good for the customer. And it's just baked into their DNA. It doesn't matter if there's revenue attached to it. It doesn't matter if it's going to even sell more iPods. None of that matters if they can't make a justifiable case that they believe in that a customer is going to be happier with their product because of this thing, then they won't work on it. Right. And they won't be happy with you working on it as a developer for their platform. But if you can make a case to them that you also believe that what you're building is something that people are going to love, insanely love, then they'll be all over it. That's great.
When Facebook was on the road show, I was watching Charlie Rowe's show. I love most of his interviews. And Sheryl Sandberg was on there with Mark, and she talked about how they don't build the content, they build the social structure around the content. Mm-hmm. So they're not the game, right? They're not the Netflix, they're not the Spotify, they're the social structure around that. And so if you are building apps that help to facilitate that, you're generally going to get favorable treatment.
And if you can connect with them on that level, if you can connect with a group at Apple and show to them that you have that you're on the same mission that they are, which is to, you know, create these insanely great products, then they'll be all over it. They will promote you. They won't. But if you're not doing that, they're just a black box. They close off. And Facebook is the same way. If you connect with them on that level of advancing their mission as what they see as the most important thing, then, you know, they're all over it. And for that time when we were working on Words with Friends, that was Mark Zuckerberg's favorite game. And he fundamentally believed that this was going to be the solution to Facebook gaming, was Words with Friends, because that's what he thought.
Because it was so social.
So fundamentally social. And so they gave us everything.
Right.
I mean, like, it was unfettered access to, and they would even give us developers and help us out, whatever, because he believed in what we were doing, because it fit with their vision of the world.
So step back a little bit from your studio orientation, your creative orientation, your game orientation. Kind of put your business hat on. Apple's model, where everything is totally in their control, and Android, which is freaking Wild West, and you got 1,200 different devices you got to deal with. Which model? Yeah, both of them are going to be successful. I don't think we want to argue is one going to be. It's not an either or, right? If you were building an app or you were doing something, where would you go in terms of what you do? Is it just really easy to be Apple?
No, it's not easy.
There you go. There you go.
Not at all easy to be Apple, I don't think. But I'm in love with that approach. You know, I think that you know, I'm a believer in their ability to, you know, I hate the word control, and in fact, even Steve Jobs would use that word a lot, controlling the customer experience, because that sounds like an evil thing or a bad thing. But I just think it's about being able to...
Highly suggestive guiding.
Yeah, exactly. It's about being able to provide an experience that the user's not going to get lost. They're not going to wander into the woods, and it meets the standard. And I think that despite how much work Google has put into their product, they can't deliver that yet. I mean, I keep trying to go back to an Android phone. I don't want to be the person that's not aware of what's happening on the other side. And I just, maybe you have both. No. I got this and I got this. Yeah. Because I'm trying to learn both. Yeah, exactly.
And I gravitate towards this.
It just works.
This is an easier example,
to use the Apple.
But I want to learn this because this is where the market share is going.
Yeah.
And so now I have two different phones and everything else, and it's
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. Both approaches can be successful,
Right.
but the Apple approach is more fun for me. So.
Right. Anything you want to share with us that we may not know about that you believe that is really successful to starting a business? I mean, we can talk for hours about how you hire people and how you grow them and how you mentor them and everything else. But anything really kind of sticks out that you say, hey, I want to make sure that if you're out there and you're thinking about growing a business, whether it's a game or it's some new technology, that hey, this is really important based on my experience and my journey that I've been on so far.
So this would sound really cynical. So maybe there's a way to say it that isn't cynical, because the first thing I want to say is don't trust anybody, but I don't actually mean it that way. I'm a very trusting person, and what I mean is, what you'll find a lot if you're running a business or starting a business is that everybody has an idea for what you should be doing, or can offer you a service or some way to accelerate what you're doing. So you'll say, well, I need to do payroll, as just a dumb example. Okay, there's a payroll service. We know how to do that, whatever. Well, or I need to do marketing. Oh, well, let's hire this marketing company, and they're going to handle that. What I've learned myself is supremely valuable to me is that despite the fact that it's going to slow me down a lot and I'm going to stumble many times, going through something myself at least the first time, rather than taking advantage of something that looks like it's going to accelerate me or my business, it has been just extremely valuable. And it gets back to the thing I was talking about, like as we transition from the studio model and gaming to this business model, this full business model, there were lots of opportunities for me to just kind of take an example of what somebody said I was supposed to do and just go do that, rather than try to figure it out for myself and learn as a business what those things meant fundamentally.
And give me, for instance, what's one that comes to mind when you think about that story?
Well, I mean, payroll is the one that comes to, I mean, it's just because in the beginning we would jump onto that and we use some payroll service. Once we started getting into it and understanding how we could set it up that was more advantageous for employees, benefits, it's not just payroll, but benefits and all that kind of stuff, we were able, I think, to create a system that was much better, and we fundamentally understood how it was benefiting us as a company and how it was benefiting the employees. Because we went through that, and it was painful, like any company having to do its own payroll or benefits or handle insurance or that kind of stuff. But, and I think there were plenty of other examples like that in terms of the technology that we would use. And I'm not advocating go build everything from scratch or go, but if there's something that looks hard and somebody's offering you an easy solution, I think it's at least good to understand why it's hard, before you just go and take the easy road.
So I'm going to ask questions here in a minute. I got one final question for him, and then I'll go to the audience. So do we have, Jax, do we have anybody that can run mics? Great, thank you. 600,000 plus apps in the App Store.
1 million now.
Is it 1 million now?
It's over 1 million.
Well, that's last week. No, just kidding. Really, really hard to differentiate if you're focused on that distribution. Do you even go down that path? Or if you do, you're going up against the 0.001% that you're going to be successful. So how would you lower the risks in that kind of distribution? What would you do to differentiate yourself from the crowd?
I think that fundamentally, and this is going to sound a little bit trite, but fundamentally you can't rely on the channels, even the paid channels, to get you that distribution.
Right.
So you first of all, you're right. You have to find a different way to tackle that problem, because you will fall beneath the noise. If you create something that's good and you persevere at it, of course you're going to be successful, and that's an obvious thing to say. But on the App Store or in the mobile ecosystem, I think you really have to think about the way that apps are shared and communicated between people. It's fundamentally different than the way we have consumed software or services in the past.
Right.
Because I can turn to you and I'd say, hey, check out this app, and you can have it yourself 5 seconds later. There's nothing that's worked that way before. And that changes all of the ways in which we think about how to market and spread an app. And, in Words of Friends' case, it was a fairly straightforward process. When I start a game, the first thing I do when I install Words with Friends, the first action I take causes me to bug another human being to go play their game. It reminds them to go play their game. Then they make their move and it reminds me back. So getting over those thresholds like I was talking about, the 5-minute threshold, the 1-day threshold, the 1-week threshold, we built an app that fundamentally tackled that by virtue of its design itself. Like, our users remind each other to play the game. We don't have to do anything. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they then reach out and try and find other people to actively engage in that app and to play with, because they need opponents. And we built an app that there is no way to play it other than that. There's no single player. There's none, that focus that we had on just with friends is what caused that to spread. obviously that's one technique that worked, but I think that if you want to break away from the pack that way, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for something that's going to tap into the way that people are going to share and tell each other about the app that's actually built into the design of the app itself. And there's not a silver bullet there. I think you can examine existing apps like with friends, like Facebook, Instagram, what have you, and you can see how they're doing that and how they spread. But I think there's many more things like that yet to be discovered.
Last one, I just want to ask him about this because this is interesting to me personally. Registration. Every single app has it, but everybody does it differently. How do you approach registration? How do you approach getting that user to first start using the app? What are you trying to get them to do?
I'm just trying to get them to have fun because with 1 million apps, what's our attention span? I'll give an app 10 seconds. If it doesn't prove to me why I need to be spending more than 10 seconds on it, I'm going to shut it down because I didn't, probably it was free or maybe I spent 99 cents on it or what have you, but it's just, there's such a high noise level that we're all naturally filtering down to like the super short attention span. So login screens, sign-up screens, we tried to whittle down to the bare minimum. And now, because of the relationships thing you have with Facebook, there's still a login screen for Words with Friends and all that. But I think there are ways to get around that even. Like, there's this app, if you guys have used it, called GroupMe, that does a really clever thing where it gets you to send their servers a text message. And by doing that, it knows what your phone number is and then uses your contacts list to connect you. You don't have to sign up for Facebook or anything else. The other thing that I keep thinking about recently and sort of thinking about where things are going, I still think, and this is a little bit tangential to game development, but I think that the fundamental premise of certain apps like Instagram, like Facebook, whatever, the object of sharing is still not very social. Like Facebook is obviously the most social application ever created, it's awesome, but the fundamental premise of sharing is my wall, it's mine, and you have your wall and it's yours, and I gotta come over and look at yours and write on, you come over and look at mine and write on it. And I just don't think that's, like, I think the most social things are something we did together, so like, and Facebook doesn't really have that concept. It's buried. They have like pages and things you can share, but,
that's interesting.
And Words with Friends was not, there was no sense of me or you, and purposely, there's no leaderboards, there's no stats or whatever. The only object in that game is a shared object. Two people have to be attached to it, and then it connects those two people. And I think that same model could be applied to photo sharing, to even social networks, because I think that maybe the next generation of sharing is going to be about sharing around something rather than sharing myself and you share yourself and we're
Is sharing and helping the same, or because in the game, if you're an opponent, you're really not helping your other component?
I think they're both really valid. In a game context, cooperative, we just call that cooperative versus competitive. And it's personal preference. I love cooperative games. And in fact, Words with Friends is, I think, one of the reasons it's so successful. The fundamental game design of it, going back to crosswords and Scrabble and all these things, is it's a cooperative and a competitive game. So while I'm trying to beat you and create the highest words, we're actually building this thing together. Like, I can only build off your words and my words, and we're building this structure. So we're actually cooperating at the same time we're competing. And I think that's a kind of a secret sauce to that game design.
That's very cool. Before we go to questions, I want to first acknowledge Jennifer Conley. Is she here? Where's Jennifer? Thank you very much, Jennifer. Jennifer runs Alcatel-Lucent's Gravity Center, and they've got 22 companies now. Do you have like 92? 22 companies. So if you are interested in starting a business, they have all kinds of resources for you. And then also Robert Surek, where is he? There's Robert. Robert is the, thank you. Robert, for the last 12 to 13 years, has run the Dallas and the Southwest region for Silicon Valley Bank. They know a little bit about early stage businesses, and I highly recommend that you look at organizations like that as opposed to more traditional organizations if you are in the tech world, because they don't ask you questions that other bankers generally do, because they understand your business a lot better. And so without those kind of folks involved, I can't thank them enough for what we're doing here with Startup Grind. So who got the mic first? 1 second.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You speak out loud too. We got an echo here in the room. Go ahead.
Yeah. Does letterpress keep you up at night?
What's that?
we're having a hard
No,
time.
letterpress, the Words of Friend like-ish game.
Oh, Letterpress.
Yes.
Oh, I
Does
love
it keep you up at
Letterpress.
night?
Yeah, that's a fantastic game. If you guys haven't checked that out, it's a brand new type of board game. It's a very original design. It's the guy who designed it, I think, really understands interfaces and creating really well-designed, easy-to-use apps. So you should check it out. It's called Letterpress. It's on the App Store. Not to necessarily give credit to the competition, but the guy creates great
We
stuff.
want to be honest.
Yes.
Right? No spin zone.
Yes, I love that game.
Next question? Yes. Just speak up and just
Yeah.
turn around to the audience and say it loud. Let me.
Yeah, you can repeat the question.
Question is, he's obviously done a lot in the startup world. What are his thoughts about lean startup and what Eric and Steve Blank are doing?
Yeah, a huge proponent of that stuff. New Toy was mostly bootstrapped. My brother and I spent our life savings on the starting the company. We each burned through $100,000 of our own capital, which was pretty much all we had. Took a little bit of seed funding, like another couple $100,000, and almost went out of business within the first year. And it's just a typical story of the company just scraping the ground and then taking back off again. But the entire time we were focused on those principles, not from the stake of like, let's do it like the books, but really just, I had no personal desire to grow the company beyond what I could afford to fund it with out of its own revenue. So just really wanted to get to a point where the decision to hire somebody or not was not based on whether I could convince another investor to give me some more money, but was based on whether we had revenue coming in to support another employee. And going through that process, I would never want to do something different. I mean, it was just the greatest guiding light for us to know that we were doing the right thing, or to feel at least that we were doing the right thing, because our ability to grow was directly in proportion to our ability to create revenue and to get more users and more customers. And like going through that process just felt like the most natural thing ever, and felt like this firm hand that was helping guide us along, because we were unwilling after that point to take any more money or to grow outside of that. And it wasn't a constraining factor. I mean, of course, we had all the moments that anybody would expect when you have a product that's blowing up like that, where we're literally 2 days away from the entire Words of Friends database falling over and be gone forever. I mean, there were moments where, just for the folks that are software developers in the room, like we went through the thing where we're sitting there when we were first creating the game, and I remember this moment very vividly. We assigned an integer to the number of moves in the game. And so, the maximum size of that was 2 billion, something like that. And I'm thinking in my head, and I remember saying this to my brother because we were kind of working on it at the time, I'm like, if we ever had more than 2 billion moves in this system, we would be so rich that I won't ever have to think about this moment. So I'm not even going to worry about it, and this is going to save us some memory or something like that.
Psych.
And yeah, right. So 1 year later, he's just looking at me like, that was the stupidest thing you've ever done. We're closing on what we called the move apocalypse, because the second that somebody made that one move that was over that, it was going to wreck it. All your games would reset, and it would wipe it out. And we were, under this time pressure to get a new version of the app out that supported long integers and all. I mean, it was just horrible. But the pressures of those situations and having to, work within the constraints of a bootstrapped environment was so invaluable to me.
Were you focused on engaged users as Silicon Valley wants, or were you focused on revenue as people generally outside Silicon Valley want? The answer is yes, but you got to pick one.
The answer is yes.
You got to pick one.
Right? I mean, we were focused on users.
Okay.
I mean,
because you knew with users,
eventually. The thing is, when Words of Friends, if any of you could experience those moments, we almost killed Words of Friends a half dozen times. Thank goodness my brother and I were the two founders that started the company, and we had a lifetime of teaching each other to just take the opposite opinion of whatever the other person is. So if he would come in one morning and he'd be like, this isn't working, we have to shut the game down, we need to go do something else, I got to go back and get a job, then I would be like, you're an idiot, we're not going to shut this down, it's the best thing. And then I would come in a week later and be like, we got to shut this down, it's a failure, and he would take that opposite stance. And that kept the game alive.
Yeah, you need that.
But yeah, yeah, absolutely, you need that. But anyway, some of the other principles of lean development, I kind of found out about after the fact, but were certainly things that we utilize. Like we won't grow a team beyond the ability to fit them in a circle. because we just found that anything beyond that size was not efficient for us. Even though I'd worked at plenty of companies where we were on 100-person teams, we wouldn't grow a team beyond 8 or 9, which is kind of where you can turn around and talk to everybody else in the room.
Right.
Yeah, and I still believe that almost any app can be built with a team that size today. So.
Next question? Yes.
So I would imagine that the number of iterations and prototypes that you went through with chess was drastically less than what you did with sort of your post-word games like hanging or matching and that sort of stuff. So since you've been on kind of those two sides of the process, sort of small, kind of trusting your intuition versus highly iterative and highly prototyping, sort of where do you think, do you kind of fall on which extreme if you prefer, or kind of the blend, or what's your kind of feeling on that?
As far as I understand, the question is kind of where on the spectrum do I like to live between rapid iteration and tons of iterative, versions of something versus just building something that I know and going towards that and not having to do it as much. It was actually in traditional games where we'd spend the most time iterating. So when you're trying to create a game like Halo or Age of Empires or these games that we worked on, you'll spend a year or two lost in the woods where you just don't, because you have to find the fun, the core fun of what that game is. And when we're creating something like Hanging with Friends, it's basically based on Hangman, that part of the cycle gets shortened to this. So there may be a couple, and certainly in the case of Hanging with Friends, for instance, there was some iteration time because it's not strictly Hangman, and so we tried some different things and what have you. I really enjoy the iterative process, and I want to head back towards that because it felt like it was more challenging to have to try and invent the core fun of something, but it really takes a lot of time, especially in game development. I don't know how if that's the case for other types of apps, but in game development, the find the fun portion, it always looks like it's not going to take the long, and it always ends up taking the longest of the project. So,
yes.
Hi, Paul. My name is Jennifer Swain. Nice
Hi,
to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So my question to you is, you talked about getting people, how hard it is to get people to come to Dallas. Well, we're in McKinney, which I know you guys are in McKinney also. So when you tell them you're in McKinney, is there an issue there, and how do you get around that?
Oh, McKinney is a huge bonus in our case. I mean, we're in in a old cotton mill. It's a 100-year-old building. And most people in their minds when they think of Dallas, they don't necessarily, I don't know what they think of Chuck Norris, or I don't know what most people, if they've never been here to Dallas. But anyway, and when we bring them to McKinney and we bring them into this cotton mill and the historic downtown, it's something they weren't expecting, and I think that's actually been a benefit to us and has actually been something that's made recruiting easier than if we were just bringing them into a random office building in the middle of Dallas or something. Yeah, and also McKinney, for what it's worth, McKinney has been an extremely good partner. I mean, they've just, from an incentive standpoint, just from they loved having us there, and they've treated us really well. So.
A couple more questions. Did you have one here? She's close enough. Hold on a second.
Wondering, you've had so much success with word-oriented games. What do you see as the future of educational games? And I have to point out, I read an article last week about how India is distributing $50 tablets that run on Android.
Kosh or whatever.
Yeah, and there's going to be like 200 million of them in a couple of years. So it seems like there's a huge opportunity for people to develop games that are engaging and fun and educational and can kind of and have a social, it's kind of, you roll it all together and make it beneficial as well as enjoyable. What do you think about that?
I totally agree.
As a business opportunity.
As a parent, first of all, of a 4-year-old.
And one on the way.
Yeah, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and one on the way. Excuse me, hold on. Watching my 4-year-old go through, because she's been using an iPad since before she could walk. I mean, she was less than 1-year-old, I think, when she started playing with the iPad and the iPhone. Watching her graduate from the Tokaboka apps. Have any of you guys seen the Tokaboka games, or you have kids that play them? This is one of the great, if you haven't downloaded it, they're, in my opinion, one of the best app developers on the App Store. They totally understand quality, and they understand their audience being 4-year-olds or 3-year-olds. And they build these apps that get to that principle of, like, you touch it and it does exactly what you'd expect it to do, and it's delightful and what have you. Watching her go from that to now she's doing games where she's drawing letters and learning how to, and I mean, she's starting to move into like these puzzle games like Amazing Alex and these other things. I don't know exactly what it's doing to her brain. I mean, hopefully it's a good thing. It certainly seems to me like she's getting an opportunity to learn from that device that I would have loved to have, growing up myself. I think that the opportunity is immense. I think that the thing I'm getting a little bit annoyed of is this term gamification that everybody's throwing around. Like, it's just, let's gamify this, let's gamify that. Like, that's not a good motivation to me. But if your motivation is, let's build a game that teaches, that fundamentally educates, I think that's not difficult, and there's a huge opportunity there for that. Especially with these touch-based devices where you don't have to teach somebody how to interact with the computer. It's just right there. Yeah, and those those tablets you were talking about, which in fact are $35 if you're a student in India, that's a world-changing event. Because these are great tablets. These are not crappy things. They run full Android. They're like 1.4 gigahertz. They got 512 megs of RAM. That's, for $35. Yeah.
2 more questions. Yes, in the back.
I remember several years ago reading about Microsoft's master plan of, I guess, 3 screens in a cloud. If I recall correctly, it's the PC, the TV, and I guess your phone. The kind of integrating everything together, do you still think do you think that's the future of like all your devices kind of, working seamlessly? Or, I kind of see that people are leaning towards their cell phone being the end-all, be-all of everything.
I didn't hear all the cell phone being be-all, end-all, but I didn't hear, if you can speak a little closer.
Or try without the microphone.
Yeah.
The question was, do you think that the future of, I guess, hardware devices, is it having the phone, the computer, and the TV, much like Microsoft has the Xbox, the PC, and the Windows Phone? Or do you think we're going to go to, the handheld device being the end-all, be-all to everything?
I look at, or the way I think about, at least in terms of games and entertainment, I don't think about it as devices anymore. I think about it as venues. So the living room is a venue. Like, I sit down on my couch, I'm in a relaxed position, I'm ready to consume my content in a kind of lean back. And so when I think about building a game, I don't necessarily think about what device you're using in that context, but I think about what state of mind you're in and the fact that you probably just came home from work and you're like, just kind of want to chill on the couch. You don't want to move a lot. You don't want to necessarily get up and play with your Kinect or what have you. Again, with a mobile device, the venue is on the move, and so the things that you think about in that venue, independent of exactly how the device works or how it's structured, is a barrage of constant distractions. So you can only consume things in small little chunks, and the app has to be intelligent about letting you pick up where you left off and not lose context for what you're doing and these kind of things. And whereas the living room context is much larger, I'm thinking a lot about the kitchen table context these days, and like, in that context, you're actually facing other people, and maybe there's a couple people there, or 2 or 3, whereas in the living room, maybe it's 1 or 2. So I personally not thinking as much about devices and more about the various places and contexts in which you're using technology. I think that probably too that that's going to fit well with what's going to happen in the next 5 years, because you've got like the sensors on a Kinect, which is a depth camera that can like not only sense vision, but also know where objects are in 3-dimensional space. Those things cost less than $1 now to produce, commodity-wise. So there's no reason why we're not going to have those things everywhere. Everything you own, your backpack, your pants, your living room, your whatever, is going to have these embedded sensors and computers that always know where you are and always can respond to you and always can listen to your voice and know where your hands are and what your fingers are doing and whatever else. And I think that's going to even play more into this idea of the venue rather than the piece of technology that you're interacting with.
Last question. Anybody else? Yes.
Operation. Oh.
It's actually better if you don't use that.
Yeah, we don't.
Thank you.
They're going out.
Thank you. So
the question is going from Halo to mobile, or were you influenced by Game Boy?
100%. I love that question because that's exactly what happened for me. So I remember I remember the first time I saw somebody playing the first time I saw a Nintendo DS being used by a person that I just didn't know. It kind of broadened my whole horizons. It was a little girl in DFW airport sitting at a terminal, and she had a pink Nintendo DS, and there were stickers all over it and little charms dangling from it, and she was playing Nintendogs, and it just changed the way I thought about people interacting with games, because before then I had been building games for a certain audience that was not that girl. And I think that what's always fascinated me with the way Nintendo approaches their products as the creators of the DS, and has actually been a huge inspiration. And when people ask me what's an inspiration for Words with Friends, Nintendogs is actually a big part of it. And the reason is Nintendo builds hardware that has no reason to exist without the software that they create for it. And they build software that could not exist without the hardware. So the Nintendo DS had no right to exist until Nintendogs came along, and then all of a sudden you saw people petting their dogs with this virtual stylus and kids and stuff, and it was like, oh, that's why they built the Nintendo DS with the stylus. And before then you were like, what is this? I don't want a stylus to game. And then all of a sudden it made sense. And Nintendogs as a piece of software could not have existed at all if not for the hardware of the Nintendo DS that enabled it. And of course the Wii is another fantastic example of this, where they built first-party software that could only exist with their hardware, and they create this synergy of those two things. When we set out to create apps for the App Store in the first place and found Newtoy, my vision for the company was, let's create the Nintendo of the iPhone. Now, that sounds like a trite thing to say, but what we're trying to do is, first of all, I thought Nintendo's never going to make software for the iPhone because they only make software for their own devices. So this is a huge opportunity because they're not going to be in this space. I know I don't have to compete with them, so I can try and embrace the philosophies of Nintendo as a game developer and build that into our own products. But more than that, I thought if we were Nintendo and we had invented the iPhone ourselves as a gaming device, so forget about the fact that it's a phone and everything else. Let's just imagine we're Nintendo and we just created the next Game Boy and it's actually the iPhone. What game would I create to launch this product with? And that's where With Friends came from, because With Friends was a game that could not exist before the iPhone. Until we were all carrying around little portable devices in our pocket that were always connected to the internet, always connected to your friends, always on and able to receive push notifications, and easy to just touch with your finger and play with. Before that, Words with Friends could not exist. And that's how the idea came about in the first place. We said, what's an idea that could not exist before this device? And if we were Nintendo, what will we build for it? And that's where Words of Friends came from. So yeah, the DS was a huge inspiration for us.